What if I told you that you could understand Black history not just in the past, but in living context? What if I told you that you could leave this conversation with a meaningful language that you could use in everyday conversation? Would you be willing to listen? I believe that you would. My name is Kevin Zimmerman of Unlocking Black History on YouTube. And in this video, we're going to be discussing how to have the discussion about Black history and key terms that you can use to validate your information. Now, in this video, I'm also going to share with you some examples that I have been able to use to successfully navigate this conversation throughout a long period of time. As a matter of fact, to give you some idea, I want you to stay with me here. I've actually had the privilege of traveling all around the world. And as I was traveling internationally, I was able to engage in deliberate conversation about the plight of Blacks in America. In addition, I've had the fortune of traveling to 47 of the 50 states within the United States and deliberately having this conversation. And because of the experience that I've obtained from being able to go to those places and talk to people that were rich, talk to people that were poor, talk to people who lived in rural communities, and talk to people who lived in the inner city, to talk to male, talk to female. I'm able to take that along with my experience and studies and share that successful information with you. So let's get started here. But before we do, one of the things that I'm pretty confident about is that there are a lot of mixed feelings around Black history as we're living here in America. And so I want you to do something for me. I want you to drop a word in the comment that describes how America makes you feel today. Okay. I want you to let me know, do you feel sad? Do you feel disappointed? Optimistic? Are you angry? Or is it uncertainty? What I do want to share with you is this: whatever you are feeling, your feelings are legit. Now, regarding Black history wrapped in today's climate, what can be frustrating is how do we talk about it? That's the thing. That is what can create a lot of anxiety. But the good news is this: the first place I'm going to encourage you to start is from your own lived experience. That's right. The first place I want you to start in having discussions about Black history is your own lived experience. Now, you may be asking, how is that so? What are you talking about? This is what I mean. If you were living in the United States for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, if you were born and raised here, one thing I know for certain, you've had some encounter when dealing with slavery. One thing I know for certain, you've had some encounter by way of reading a book or watching a movie talking about Reconstruction. You had some encounter if it was by way of talking to another person about the civil rights movement. You've had some kind of encounter when you saw the resilience of Blacks in America. You've had some kind of encounter with the resistance of the plight of Blacks in America. So when you take that and you couple that with your own lived experience, guess what? You are in position to have a meaningful discussion about Black history. Now, I hope you heard something that was underlying. But if not, I'm going to make it plain. You do not have to be Black to have a meaningful conversation about Black history. Now, as I traveled throughout the United States, there's another thing that I want to address that causes a lot of people to refrain from engaging in having the conversation about Black history. And what that is they are totally afraid of how they sound when they engage in conversation. Let me be clear. No one, absolutely no one, is asking you to articulate like James Earl Jones having the conversation about Black history when he was alive. No one, absolutely no one, is asking you to articulate like Maya Angelou having the conversation about Black history when she was alive. No one is asking you to articulate like you've graduated with a degree in communication from Howard University, from Harvard University, or Yale. I can assure you that if you just go ahead and be yourself and have a sincere conversation, that you are well equipped to have the conversation about Black history in America. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to be giving you some examples of how I have been able to successfully navigate those conversations. But I'm going to leave you with some starting points here. The first thing I want you to do is understand when you engage in conversation about Black history, I want you to engage from three different vantage points, okay? I want you to hear me. I want you to engage from an informed vantage point. Inform meaning that you might inform someone of information that you've come across, that you found out to be true and substantiated, and you're sharing that information with someone else. But that information that you're sharing, or that someone else that you're talking to while sharing that information, may have a degree of knowledge about Black history already, and you just informed them of some additional information that they could take into consideration and use. The second point, or advantage point, I want you to consider is enlightenment. You may very well enlighten someone on information that you've come across to be able to discuss Black history. Okay. What I mean by enlightened is you may be talking to someone that may have limited to no knowledge of what you're speaking on regarding Black history. And please let me say this at this point. When I'm talking about speaking about Black history is being used as an umbrella. We know that when we talk about Black history, we could be talking about slavery as a specific talking point. We could be talking about Reconstruction as a specific talking point. We could be talking about civil rights as a specific talking point. We could be talking about resilience as a specific talking point. Or we could be talking about resistance. Or we could be talking about an individual. We could be talking about a past individual, somewhat like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Or we could be talking about a present figure such as a Benjamin Crump. So when I'm in the context of this conversation talking about Black history, I use the word Black history. I'm only using that as a elevated term. But as you address the conversation, I want you to address conversations about Black history from the vantage point of informing, enlightening, and then the third point is receiving information to be taken into consideration. You follow me? You're either going to be informing, you're going to be enlightening, or you're going to be receiving information to be taken into consideration. Because we want that dialogue to go both ways. And someone may provide you with information that is substantial or beneficial. Now, the next thing I want you to take into consideration is this. Do not defend Black history. Okay? Do not defend Black history. Black history does not need to be defended. So once again, do not defend Black history. Black history does not need to be defended. Okay. Another point I want you to take into consideration when you're having the conversation is this: control the dialogue and stay on topic. Now, keep this in mind. When I say control the dialogue and keep on topic, I'm not asking you to dominate the conversation, but I am asking you to have the courage to keep the topic on the primary source of the conversation. What I mean by that in simple terms is this: eliminate the whataboutisms. Okay. So if we're having a conversation about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., eliminate the, well, what about Charlie Kirk? Let me share with you an approach that I've successfully been able to take to control the conversation and keep the conversation focused on the topic. When someone offers me or suggests a what about ism, I politely say, hey, listen, it's to my understanding that we are talking about this topic here. And I'm not regretting that that might not be important to you. But can we discuss that at another time? Because if we're going to get an understanding about Black history, we need to stay focused one point at a time. Now, I'm willing to have that conversation at a later time. But right now, let's stay focused here. Would you mind doing that? Generally, the individual realizes that they've gotten off topic. And if they're sincere about having the conversation with you, then they will be willing to stay engaged. Okay. So when we have the conversation about Black history, and if you're just not joining, we're going to do a quick recap. First of all, I want you to know that you are equipped to have the conversation about Black history. You do not have to be Black to engage in this dialogue. First, understand that you are equipped. Then understand that you are to engage in the conversation from one of three different vantage points. Of course, the first vantage point is you're informing someone of information that you have. You know, what I found interesting today was I was looking at just scrolling through Facebook, and a someone who had a master's in education had put a post up that talked about maintaining a woke ideology. And I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just sharing this in context with this conversation. And they said one way to maintain doing that is to be open to having conversation and to be willing to be open minded to receive information. And I thought that was pretty good. And I think it was applicable to share in this moment. I want you to not only inform people, and don't be afraid to inform people of the information that you obtain, but also don't be afraid to enlighten someone on information that you've received about Black history, and that information is fact based and substantiated. Don't be afraid. Welcome that conversation. Be willing to share that information. And the last thing that we talked about on this point was to be willing to receive information to be taken into consideration. Okay, you're going to get all kinds of information. And what you don't want to do in the midst of the conversation is to shoot down information that someone is providing you if they're demonstrating that they're willing to have an open dialogue. That's what we want to have, because the ultimate objective is not to get them to agree. The ultimate objective is to get to a place where they can at least understand. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about being able to approach it from three different vantage points. And when someone says something to you that you may not be aware of, it is quite okay to even say to them, hey, that's pretty interesting. I'm going to take that into consideration and do some research. Okay, another point that we made, if you just not joined us, is I'm asking that you do not defend Black history. Black history does not need to be defended. And I'm going to share with you some language used that you can use in the conversation so that you're able to navigate that when the opportunity presents itself, or if ever that opportunity presents itself. The last point, again, was to control the dialogue and stay on topic. Again, I'm not asking that when you engage in the conversation that you control the conversation. I'm not asking that you're the one that does all the talking in the conversation. What I'm asking you to do is to make sure the conversation stays on topic. Okay. Eliminate the whataboutism. The example I gave previously was, if we're talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we're not going to say, well, what about Charlie Kirk? We're going to politely bring them back to the talking point, which was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, I want to move on to the next segment of this video, and that's to share with you how to discuss Black history. And this is very important to me. And I'm sure what I'm about to say to you, that you will probably identify with what I'm about to say in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Oftentimes, when Black history is taught or discussed, it's talked about or discussed in isolated moments, not as a continuous story. Once again, I repeat myself. Oftentimes, when Black history is discussed or taught, is discussed or talked about in isolated moments, not as a continuous story. And that's something that I think is essential that we have to change. Yes, Black history is about slavery. Yes, Black history is about Reconstruction. Yes, Black history is about civil rights. Yes. Black history is about resilience. Yes. Black history is about resistance. But what often gets continuously left out of the conversation is the pattern that should be discussed and how the systems and the pattern evolves. Black history is not only about slavery, Reconstruction, civil rights, resistance, and resilience. Black history is also about patterns and how the patterns evolve. Now, if you think about what I just shared with you, you can then see, if you insert patterns into the conversation, although you're talking about Black history in present text, you can bring the patterns from the past into the conversation you're having at this present day in time. So once again, always keep in mind that the systems disappear, but the patterns, they remain the same. And we must speak on those patterns. I'll give you an example that I had to use when I was asked about an event in Black history. I was asked at one time in a conversation, had I ever experienced the laws that were under states' rights, but they weren't covered by federal law. And I said, certainly, and I'm going to share with you that story. When I was about 8 years old, my mother, my sister, and I went to a small town in Tennessee. While we were in Tennessee visiting my grandmother, we took my grandmother to a local store to cash a check. At that store, the store served as a store, the bus station, and a bank. And while my grandmother was in line to cash her check, a white person would walk in, and my grandmother would bow her head and step back. Then she would move a little bit further, and another white person would come in. When that white person came in, my grandmother would bow her head and step back. The third time a white person came in the door, my mother then said, no one else will step in front of her because her money is just as good as anybody's money in this bank. When my mother said that, a small whisper happened. That small whisper began to get louder and louder. In addition to the whispers becoming language that you could clearly hear articulated, more people began to come into the store. As that took place, my father and my uncle rushed in. They grabbed my grandmother, mother, my sister, and myself. And they rushed us to my grandmother's house, who only lived probably 10 minutes or less from the store. They threw all of our belongings in a bag and then took us back to the store, at which time the bus was there. My father pushed us onto the bus and he stayed in the door. And shortly thereafter, my uncle came to the bus, gave the bus driver our tickets, and the bus drove off and we went back to Toledo, Ohio. I was too young to understand then what took place, but what happened was when my mother had the audacity to speak out against someone cutting in front of my grandmother, I had no idea that she was in violation of black codes. Black codes were laws written to support segregation in the South that states' rights protected and the federal government would rarely intervene. So I was able to live that out. Let's fast forward when I was a young man in high. No, I wasn't quite in high school. I was about to transition out of grade school, going into high school. And my father wanted to purchase a home. Okay. My father wanted to purchase a home on the outskirts of the city. However, when my father went to the man whose house he wanted to buy, the man gave my father a document. Okay. And the document said that I cannot I cannot lease, sell, nor rent this house to anybody other than the Caucasian race. Now, how was that able to happen? And someone asked, well, was that just him? Well, I could say this about that. There were laws that were implemented by the Federal Housing Association denying Black people the opportunity to live in the suburbs, because what happened was when during the Great Migration, people came into the inner cities, and some places in the inner cities got redlined. And when they got redlined, those people within the red line was not able to buy, sell, or lease a home outside of that red line that limited their ability to have the kind of growth that we see from home ownership. Okay. So that was another opportunity I was able to share. But with those examples, as I talk to people, I want you to insert the same words that I use. And it helped me, and I'm sure that it's going to help you. Anytime that someone asks you a question about Black history, I want you to lead with two words going forward. It's documented. You see, it's well documented about the difference between slavery and chattel slavery. I understand that in today's time, some people are saying that we should not be focusing on slavery as if telling the truth about slavery is a bad thing. But there is a difference between slavery and chattel slavery. It's documented. It's documented what happened in regarding the plight of Blacks in America during the Reconstruction era when they rolled Reconstruction back and Jim Crow laws were inserted. When you get into that conversation, lead with, well, it's documented. We know that after Jim Crow and the passing of the Civil Rights Bill, it's documented what took place after that happened. Slavery, racism didn't disappear just because the Civil Rights Bill was passed. How do we know? Because it's documented that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963 because he aligned with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to advance civil rights. It's well documented that racism didn't die because 4 years after that, in 1968, I witnessed my mother, my grandmother, and it seemed like the entire Black community looked like they had lost all hope. Why? Because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. For what? For what? Because he wanted to advance civil rights and show that everyone in America should be able to exercise life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When someone talks to you about the ghetto, I want you to be encouraged using the word, well, you know, I hear what you're saying about the ghetto, but it's documented how it got that way. When they redlined the district, also white flight took place, which means that the white people abandoned the inner cities for the suburbs. You remember the commercials when they had the white family with the baby and the dog and the white picket fence. You notice you didn't see any other nationality of people there. Okay. And then when they had white flight and they abandoned the inner city, guess what? All of the resources and the governmental resources that supported the inner city went along with them. And so when someone talks to you about the ghetto, start with, well, it's documented that that's how it got this way. And that way we can create an understanding about what's happening, even with the stuff that we're seeing in America today. Okay. One of the great things about using the word it's documented is you are now engaging in the conversation from a vantage point of you not talking from your opinion. So I'm going to ask you as you move forward from this video on and you engage in conversation about Black history, first know that you are qualified and you are equipped to do so. Then I want you to understand that you are qualified and equipped to inform someone and enlighten someone, and that you are willing to receive information that you will take into consideration. I don't want you to fight about Black history because you don't need to defend it. Black history has enough substantial information to stand on its own. Don't worry about how you sound, okay? Because no one is asking you to sound like James Earl Jones or Maya Angelou. No one is asking you to articulate like you graduated from Howard, like you graduated from Harvard, or like you graduated from Yale. Just be yourself and have communication. But the primary word, the one word that I'm going to ask you from this point forward to carry into your conversations as you talk about Black history is use those words, it's documented. Now, I'm going to also give you a follow up because as I expressed, it's documented. As I had conversation, I had someone come back to me with this follow up. They said to me, well, a lot of things are documented. And I'm going to ask you to consider the same response that I did. And my response was this: that's true. A lot of things are documented, but not everything is substantiated with the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it that's going to help you engage in conversation about Black history. And please, you heard me say some things in this video about the Great Migration. There is videos on the Unlocking Black History YouTube channel that says what happened during the Great Migration. Please go and check that out. Also, one of the most watched videos on Unlocking Black History is the video about Black codes. Go check that out, along with the plethora of videos that are on there that we are just committed to being able to share, because we're going to ensure that Black history will never get erased. And if you ever have any questions that you think I can help you with, please feel free to let me know. Have a great evening. Take care.